All right, in this video, we're going to go over inventory assemblies. Now the screen, if you've been watching several videos, it may look a little smaller here. That's because the assembly has so many things. When you create an assembly, we had to change the resolution. There's a couple videos where you have to change the resolution so that everything can fit on the screen. But when you're creating an assembly, so if you haven't watched the group items video, make sure to watch this as well so you kind of understand the difference, okay? The idea behind an assembly is that it's going to be something that you go and you hand a ticket out to your manufacturing supervisor and say, go, assemble these parts. 50 of them, 100 of them, whatever the quantity is, go put them together and stick them on the shelf so I know how many of these finished good parts I have available for sale. Okay? So it's different than, say, a group item, because in a group item, we are not assembling them ahead of time. All right? So we gave an example around cars with group items. So with assemblies, let's think about it this way. With an assembly, I purchase, let's say I manufacture cell phones. So I put together my cell phone, and it's a standard cell phone, 16 gigs, rose gold, and it comes with a charger, etc., all put together on the shelf. Okay, so I have 20 of them out there. And when I need to restock them or replenish, I do a build order. I give it out to my manufacturing person. The manufacturing person manufactures more to put on my shelf. Okay, so kind of build to stock is the term that I use a lot. Now a customer comes in and says, I want to purchase the 16 gig cell phone, and then I also want to add a blue case and an additional car charger, right? So they can add those additional parts at the time of purchase. They can customize it. Maybe they want to switch it out from rose gold to, or buy a blue case or something like that. They can add those additional customizations at the time of purchase, but we're not going to pre-assemble those additional customizations and put them on the shelf, right? We're just going to keep the base product, the cell phone that we assembled, on the shelf. Okay, and then the additional customizations come at the time of order. So those go on the sales order, not on the build assembly. Okay. Another difference between group items and assembly items: in a group item, you have a maximum of 50 components that can go into a group item. Of course, you cannot put a group within a group. In an assembly, you can have in Premiere, you can have up to 100 components that go into an assembly item. If you are using Premiere for assemblies, maybe give us a call, take a look at why you would want to look at Enterprise. The price difference isn't that much different nowadays, and you get a lot more out of it. In Enterprise, you can go up to 500 components into a single assembly. Okay? So that's a big difference there. Also, with assemblies, you can have an assembly within an assembly. So you can have sub-assemblies that go in there. You cannot have group items that go onto an assembly. Okay. All right. So again, with assemblies, the biggest thing to remember is I want to know quantity and value of my finished product that's on the shelf. A group item does not hold a quantity nor a value. Okay, an inventory part holds a quantity and value. All right, so let's go ahead and create one. So I'm going to go into my items list. You can go into your inventory center, right? Because it is an assembly part, is an inventory part, so you can go in there. But I'm going to do it from my items list because that's my old-fashioned way. So let's go ahead and say new, and we're going to create a new inventory assembly. Okay, so the inventory assembly name, give it any kind of name you want. So finished stuff. Make sure it's a name that's going to translate well to your team, so when they're searching for this, adding it to sales transactions, etc., that it's easy for them to find. Okay, you can make it a sub-item of, so if you have groups of assemblies, you can make it a sub-item. So maybe all cars that are finished good versus all cell phones that are finished good. You can't have a barcode number, so when you purchase it, if you do purchase it from a vendor, or when you sell it, you want to have a barcode that they can scan when they sell it. You do have the option to also purchase this assembly from a vendor. So let's say, again, cell phones, you have the ability to assemble them yourself. Occasionally when your manufacturing run is behind or whatever, you buy them as a finished product from the other cell phone store down the street or something like that. Okay, so if you do choose to purchase them from a vendor, it now adds in a couple fields for us. We can put in the manufacturer's part number, right? So the vendor's part number. We can put in a default cost on this item. The cost of goods sold account is just one. So you don't get two cost of goods sold accounts, one if you manufacture it and one if you purchase it from a vendor. If you need two cost of goods sold accounts, you would have to set them up as two different items. Okay. Now, if you set them up as two different items, something to remember, if you're just purchasing it from a vendor, then it doesn't have to be an assembly item at that point, right? It just has to be an inventory part. Okay. For now, I'm going to go ahead and make this cost of goods sold. Well, we don't have very good choices in there, so I'm just going to choose that one. Okay, so again, you can't have a preferred vendor. We can't have a default sales price, a tax code, and then which income account it's going to hit when we sell it. I'm going to skip over here to the side so we can take notes on this inventory part. So maybe different revs, different changes that we've made. Maybe we can keep notes internally on this. We can set up different custom fields. These custom fields would be the same fields that are tied to items, inventory parts. You can have the markup on here as well. So if the cost changes, automatically update the sales price, etc., to maintain my margins. Okay. You can have lot numbers or serial numbers tied to your inventory assemblies if you're an enterprise. And then, of course, you can have quantity discounts as well in enterprise. Here I do have the print, so I can print out what goes into my assembly, so my components that go into my assembly. I'm going to skip over the bill of materials part for just a minute and come on down here to our asset account. So our asset account is going to be when I assemble this part, which asset do I want to use? I do suggest creating a separate inventory account for finished goods from components or materials goods. That way you can kind of see how many finished goods you have on hand versus materials easily, just the value. So they have a global build point, not reorder point, right? Because it's something we manufacture. So at what point do I want to build these? Once I get down to 10 as an example. You also can have at individual location build points in enterprise. Okay, so let's get into the BOM area. So first of all, this box is kind of small, so it's harder to see. So they do have the full view here that you can use when you're setting up your BOMs. So you're going to go in and choose the individual components that go into this assembly. Okay, so I have a 5029 and I use 2 of them. And notice you can use multiple units of measure. Any of the grayed out columns are columns that I cannot edit from this screen. If I needed to edit this item for whatever reason, I can hit edit item when it's highlighted and it'll pull that item up for me. So again, if I add another down here, I can edit that item from this screen as well as needed. Okay. Now this cost here is again our stated cost. So what this is doing for us is it's figuring out for us based on our stated costs what our BOM cost is going to be. When we actually build the part, it's going to be taking our average costs, our average values for these items. Okay, so it may be that we total it up and it's $132 to build this part. But when we actually build it, because we've received some price discounts, it may only be $115 is the actual average value. Okay, so again, this is stated, gives you kind of a baseline for what your cost is, but it's not necessarily your real value. Okay. All right, so I can add inventory parts in here. I can add non-inventory parts or assembly items. The thing that's really, or I'm sorry, non-inventory parts or service items is what I meant to say. The thing that's really important when it comes to non-inventory parts or service items or other charges when you're adding them to assemblies is that you have, first of all, you want to make sure that the service item itself, right, that it is associated. You have to understand what's going to happen, right, when you use a service item. So the service item itself is when you use it on an assembly, it's going to credit whichever account you have set up at this item level. So right here I have 48,000 is set up hitting vendor refunds. Okay, so normally when I sell 4,800, right, it's going to hit my vendor refunds account as income. Okay, so I'm selling it, it's crediting, that account's going up. Now when I use it in an assembly, right, what I'm doing is I'm moving some of the cost out of, right, the individual components normally and moving it into the finished good. So what it does is it credits whatever account this item is set up to hit, and then it debits my finished good value. Okay, so you want to make sure that whichever account is set up at the service item level is the appropriate account. Now, what do we normally do for customers who want to track some service items, some default service items on their inventory part? So usually what we have is let's say machining is one of those costs that we want to build into my bill of materials. So I'm going to set it up, and I'm going to set it up as a service item. Okay. I'm going to say that this is used in assemblies, okay, because I could provide some machining costs just as a sales transaction, but when I make it a double-sided transaction like this account, it allows me to pull from this account down here when I build the product. Okay, when I sell the product, it hits this account over here. So on here, anytime we're building a cost into an assembly, I like to make the default cost $1, and I'll show you why. Okay, so default cost is $1. The expense account that we hit here should either be a machining expense account, or what it should be is it should be some kind of WIP account, right? Machining WIP, which would be an other current asset account. Okay, so it goes in with the inventory parts area. Okay. All right, so when I sell this, let's say I sell it for $20 an hour, doesn't matter. And then when I sell it, I'm going to say it has a sales account. So you have to put in a sales account in there. For people who use machining just on the so when you use machining just for assemblies as an example, then the sales account, you're never going to see it. So maybe leave the dollar amount to 0 there. Okay. But you have to put a sales account because it's QuickBooks. Okay. And I'm actually going to copy these. Oops, it did copy it across for me. Okay. So now I have machining. Now what it does when you build assemblies is it takes the stated cost for any parts that don't have an average value or an average cost, right? So inventory parts are going to have an average cost. Service items do not. So it takes the stated cost and you multiply it times the quantity. So let's say I wanted to build $10 of machining cost into this part. Okay. Now I can also add labor, and I'm going to add that as a service item as well. Okay, so labor, standard is $1, right? Always going to be $1. Now my expense account that I'm going to use now is labor WIP. Okay, And labor WIP will be an other current asset, and it'll fall under inventory. Okay, and again, 0, non-taxable, whoops, and I'm never going to sell this product. So, okay, so I expect to have $3 worth of labor. So what's going to happen again, we'll go ahead and build one of these. But when we build one of these, again, it's going to credit those inventory accounts that we have set up for WIP. And then the way that you offset those is going to be when you actually have the labor expense hit, right? So instead of the labor expense hitting direct expenses, the labor expense is going to hit WIP labor. Okay, so that's the offset there. We have other videos on this that are a lot more extensive. The other things that you can throw in here, you can throw in non-inventory parts. Okay, we can throw in some other charges. Notice you can't put in discounts or subtotal items on an assembly, right? You can do that on a group item, but you can't do that on an assembly. Okay. Now again, when you're doing the bill of materials, you want to make it pretty standard. So you may have some alterations in the future when it comes to this assembly, but you want to make it a pretty standard thing. So something that you frequently print out, build, and put on the shelf. Okay. Oh, one of the things it was warning me, it was saying that for this part, right, my cost that I have is my default cost, and my sales price that I have as my default sales price is lower than my BOM cost. So if I had, $300 in here, then it feels better about that. A couple of things that you can do when it comes to inventory parts and dealing with assemblies. If you right click on any part, so let's look at what part it is, 5029. If you right click on any part, you do have the where used in assemblies, so it'll pop up and tell you every assembly that this part is used in, and you can replace it, mass replace it in here if you needed to. So let's say 5029 was going to, end of life. We needed to replace it with 5030. You can do that in mass. Okay. So just as a quick aside or quick look at, let's go ahead and build this assembly. So I just had my finished stuff. In here, I would be able to see, right, I can build 18 of these. So I'm going to go ahead and build 2 for now so that I can actually finish it. And choose all my sites because I'm an enterprise. Okay. So when I build this part, right, so it's picking up my per quantity of 10 and 3, and enterprise on the fly on each build, you can alter it. So if I needed to use 3 5029s or maybe the machining labor, this time it just, we're new to this, and so it took 4 hours this time. So you can make alterations on the fly. That is going to affect, right, if I have 4 hours of labor versus 3 hours of labor, my cost for this is going to go up. My average value for this finished product is going to go up. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say build a new. And then let's go ahead back to this, pulling it up here so we can see behind the scenes what happened. So again, our finished good inventory was affected, right? My finished stuff. So my quantity of finished stuff went up. Okay, and my value of finished stuff went up. The asset was raised. For the inventory parts, right, the asset was lowered. Looks like this one's not set up to hit an asset account appropriately. That must have been changed in one of the other videos, but the asset is lowered. And then also we have credited the labor, so the machining costs and the labor costs. So we have 20 hours of machining costs, $20 of machining costs, $8 of labor costs. That's built into this finished good. Okay, so you can see it takes the quantity times that $1 and builds that into the finished good price. So now my finished good price is, on average, I built 2 of them, right? So on average, the finished good price is around $150. So when I go look at my assembly now on my items list, My average cost is $146 because when I built it, right, it takes that $292 and divides it by 2, so it gets my average cost of $146. And that's the value. So now when I sell this part, it's going to cost out $146 of cost. So selling it at $300, $146 of cost, that's pretty dang good. All right, so that is how to set up an inventory assembly. Again, we have tons of more specific videos around manufacturing assemblies, and we're constantly adding more videos because every time we run against a certain scenario with customers, we're going to be adding more videos around those scenarios so that you can continue to learn, ways that we've kind of made QuickBooks work for our different customers.